Welcome to another tying session. I'd like to show you a little caddis that we fish for yellowfish. It's a Dream Caddis. I can't remember who the originator of the fly is, but it's quite a successful pattern for yellowfish and for trout. It's a little caddispupa. I'm tying it on a grip 14731H, which is size 12, and the 14731H is the heavier version of the standard scud hook or caddis hook, which is the normal 14731. And I'm going to tie two different versions. I like to fish them in two different ways, either the normal one or the flashback version, and I'll show you when I get there how to do the two different ones. Now you need pheasant tail for this to use as a scudback, and I use a grip 80 olive thread, and you're going to need some copper wire for the rib, and then dubbings for the abdomen and the thorax. You start by tying about 6 or 7 barbs from either a ringneck or a golden pheasant in the back, and that will form the scudback. You tie the tips in and then run the thread halfway back and tie a piece of copper wire in. Now copper wire will form the rib. Tie that in from the front, leave a little space, a few millimeters open behind the bead, because that's where you're going to finish the fly off and need to tie the thorax in. You need to leave a little bit of space to do that, and tie the copper wire into the back, and then you wrap cover the hook, the thread with dubbing. Now I'm using a chartreuse Wapsi life cycle Nymph dubbing, a very soft dubbing. You can apply it very thin on the thread. You want a thin thorax, you don't want a thick bulky, or abdomen at least, you don't want a thick bulky abdomen. You apply that to the thread and wrap that around to create the thorax. Nice and even wraps next to each other. Create a thin thorax. You can taper it a little bit towards the front, but not too much. You don't want that bulky, finished, thick abdomen. And I just need a little bit more to finish that off. It's a very easy, very simple fly. You can tie a bunch of them in a very short period. You can tie them with tungsten beads or brass beads. I've even tied them with glass beads. That works very well. And I tie them in two different colors. I either tie them with a chartreuse thorax or abdomen like this one, or with a mustard colored abdomen. And when I tie it with a mustard colored abdomen, I sometimes use a slightly different dubbing. I will post or add a link below to this dubbing technique. It's a very simple dubbing technique, but it's just where we discuss the dubbing technique in a little bit more detail. You can just see that tapers very little towards the front. You finish the dubbing off, and you fold the pheasant tail. Broke one there, that doesn't matter too much. Fold the pheasant tail over. Don't tie it down yet. Take your copper wire and tie down with a copper wire, because you want that to be quite tight on the abdomen, and you don't want to leave bubbles. Quite often when you tie it down the front and then wrap the copper wire, you find that it wasn't tight, nice and tight on the abdomen, and you'll see the copper wire wraps are evenly spaced next to each other and you make about 5 or 6 wraps depending on the size of the fly. But don't make just 2 or 3 wraps, because then you don't get that segmented finish on the fly, and that's quite important that you get that segmented finish. And then you tie both the copper wire and the pheasant tail off together. Then you can see the pheasant tail over the back of the fly. You cut the copper wire and cut the pheasant tail. Just make sure to tie those ends in properly. Now at this point you're going to tie the antenna in, and you again use 2 barbs from the pheasant tail, and you tie one on each side pointing away from the hook. One on that side, and that can be about double the hook length. You'll find that caddispupa have quite a long antenna, and the caddis adults as well, and they can be quite long and pointing away from the hook. Trim the excess, and I'm going to tie this with a flashback. But if you don't want to do the flashback, then just leave the flash out. Just skip this step. It's very simple. You take a piece of saltwater flashabou, wide flash. You can take a couple of pieces of thin flash, but I prefer to tie it with one wide strand of flash, and I use a pole, trap that on top of the hook. It's quite slippery stuff, so I'll get my fingers closer there, and between the antenna, and wrap that, secure that with a few strands all the way back to where the abdomen ends, and then secure it all the way to the front and take your thread back. Now if you want to tie it without the flashback, just leave this out, leave the flashabou out. With the thorax, I'm going to use a camel dubbing. It's a grip camel dubbing. I'm going to use an olive, and we're going to use a split thread technique with the dubbing, and I will post a link down below so that you can learn a little bit more about the split thread technique if you're not familiar with it. It's a very successful technique, and you create a much bushier finish on the dubbing, which is what you want in the thorax area of this fly. You can just go and check that out, and it's in the techniques section as well. There are some other techniques on flytying techniques and stuff, just to learn a little bit more. And with this technique you can create, I like to use this technique with a natural dubbing, especially in the thorax area of a fly, simply because of that bushy finish, and it creates very nice legs and slightly bulkier finish without having to use more material. And once you've spun that, you wrap that around the hook in front of the antenna, brush that hair back and work it all in there. And end the thread right behind the bead. Make sure that it's behind the bead and pulled in between the bead and the dubbing, and then fold the. Obviously, you won't be doing this if you don't want to tie it with a flash. fold that flash over and also work that in between the bead and the dubbing. Make 2 or 3 wraps to make sure that's secure, and then cut the flash. Cut that off and make 1 or 2 more wraps. Make sure everything goes in behind the bead, and then finish the fly off with a few whip finishes. And that's it. Now you can tie this in the mustard color tungsten beads. I've seen it tied with orange beads. I've seen it tied with glass beads. Depending on how and where you're going to fish it. But it is quite a successful pattern. You can go and try that out. Please subscribe to the channel. Please like the video. Please comment if you have any comments or suggestions on flies. I always like to read the comments and look at the comments. And I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching.